The COVID-19 pandemic in Burkina Faso is part of the ongoing worldwide pandemic of coronavirus disease 2019 caused by severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. The virus was confirmed to have reached Burkina Faso on March 9, 2020. The death of Rose-Marie Kambar, a member of the National Assembly of Burkina Faso, on March 18 marked the first recorded fatality due to COVID-19 in sub-Saharan Africa. Etymology. Formerly the Republic of Upper Volta, the country was renamed Burkina Faso on August 4, 1984 by then-President Thomas Sankara. The words Burkina and Faso stem from different languages spoken in the country. Burkina comes from Mossi and means upright, showing how the people are proud of their integrity, while Faso comes from the Dioula language and means fatherland. The B suffix added onto Burkina to form the demonym Burkinabe comes from the Fula language and means women or men. The CIA summarizes the etymology as land of the honest men. The French colony of Upper Volta was named for its location on the upper courses of the Volta River. History. Early history. The northwestern part of present-day Burkina Faso was populated by hunter-gatherers from 14,000 BCE to 5000 BCE. Their tools, including scrapers, chisels and arrowheads, were discovered in 1973 through archaeological excavations. Agricultural settlements were established between 3600 and 2600 BCE. The Bora culture was an Iron Age civilization centered in the southwest portion of modern-day Niger and in the southeast part of contemporary Burkina Faso. Iron industry, in smelting and forging for tools and weapons, had developed in sub-Saharan Africa by 1200 BCE. To date, the oldest evidence of iron smelting found in Burkina Faso dates from 800 to 700 BC and form part of the ancient ferrous metallurgy World Heritage Site. From the 3rd to the 13th centuries CE, the Iron Age Bora culture existed in the territory of present-day southeastern Burkina Faso and southwestern Niger. Various ethnic groups of present-day Burkina Faso, such as the Mossi, Fula, and Dioula, arrived in successive waves between the 8th and 15th centuries. From the 11th century, the Mossi people established several separate kingdoms. 8th century to 18th century. There is debate about the exact dates when Burkina Faso's many ethnic groups arrived to the area. The Proto-Mossi arrived in the far eastern part of what is today Burkina Faso sometime between the 8th and 11th centuries. The Samo arrived around the 15th century. The Dogon lived in Burkina Faso's north and northwest regions until sometime in the 15th or 16th centuries, and many of the other ethnic groups that make up the country's population arrived in the region during this time. During the Middle Ages, the Mossi established several separate kingdoms including those of Tenkodogo, Yatenga, Zandoma, and Ouagadougou. Sometime between 1328 and 1338 Mossi warriors raided Timbuktu, but the Mossi were defeated by Sunni Ali of Songhai at the Battle of Kobe in Mali in 1483. During the early 16th century, the Songhai conducted many slave raids into what is today Burkina Faso. During the 18th century, the Guiraco Empire was established at Bobo Dioulasso, and ethnic groups such as the Dian, Lobi, and Birifor settled along the Black Volta. From colony to independence. Starting in the early 1890s during the European Scramble for Africa, a series of European military officers made attempts to claim parts of what is today Burkina Faso. At times these colonialists and their armies fought the local peoples. At times they forged alliances with them and made treaties. The colonialist officers and their home governments also made treaties among themselves. The territory of Burkina Faso was invaded by France, becoming a French protectorate in 1896. The eastern and western regions, where a standoff against the forces of the powerful ruler Samori Toure complicated the situation, came under French occupation in 1897. By 1898, the majority of the territory corresponding to Burkina Faso was nominally conquered. However, French control of many parts remained uncertain. The Franco-British Convention of June 14, 1898 created the country's modern borders. In the French territory, a war of conquest against local communities and political powers continued for about 5 years. In 1904, the largely pacified territories of the Volta Basin were integrated into the Upper Senegal and Niger colony of French West Africa as part of the reorganization of the French West African colonial empire. The colony had its capital in Bamako. The language of colonial administration and schooling became French. The public education system started from humble origins. Advanced education was provided for many years during the colonial period in Dakar. The indigenous population was highly discriminated against. For example, African children were not allowed to ride bicycles or pick fruit from trees, privileges reserved for the children of colonists. Violating these regulations could land parents in jail. Draftees from the territory participated in the European fronts of World War I in the battalions of the Senegalese Rifles. Between 1915 and 1916, the districts in the western part of what is now Burkina Faso and the bordering eastern fringe of Mali became the stage of one of the most important armed oppositions to colonial government, the Volta-Bani War. The French government finally suppressed the movement, but only after suffering defeats. It also had to organize its largest expeditionary force of its colonial history to send into the country to suppress the insurrection. Armed opposition racked the Sahelian north when the Tuareg and allied groups of the Dori region ended their truce with the government. French Upper Volta was established on March 1, 1919. The French feared a recurrence of armed uprising and had related economic considerations. To bolster its administration, the colonial government separated the present territory of Burkina Faso from Upper Senegal and Niger. The new colony was named Haute-Volta, named for its location on the upper courses of the Volta River, and François-Charles Alexis Édouard Hesseling became its first governor. Hesseling initiated an ambitious road-making program to improve infrastructure and promoted the growth of cotton for export. The cotton policy based on coercion failed, and revenue generated by the colony stagnated. The colony was dismantled on September 5, 1932, being split between the French colonies of Ivory Coast, French Sudan, and Niger. Ivory Coast received the largest share, which contained most of the population as well as the cities of Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso. France reversed this change during the period of intense anti-colonial agitation that followed the end of World War II. On September 4, 1947, it revived the colony of Upper Volta, with its previous boundaries, as a part of the French Union. The French designated its colonies as departments of metropolitan France on the European continent. On December 11, 1958, the colony achieved self-government as the Republic of Upper Volta. It joined the Franco-African Community. A revision in the organization of French overseas territories had begun with the passage of the Basic Law of July 23, 1956. This act was followed by reorganization measures approved by the French Parliament early in 1957 to ensure a large degree of self-government for individual territories. Upper Volta became an autonomous republic in the French community on December 11, 1958. Full independence from France was received in 1960. Upper Volta. The Republic of Upper Volta was established on December 11, 1958 as a self-governing colony within the French community. The name Upper Volta related to the nation's location along the upper reaches of the Volta River. The river's three tributaries are called the Black, White, and Red Volta. These were expressed in the three colors of the former national flag. Before attaining autonomy, it had been French Upper Volta and part of the French Union. On August 5, 1960, it attained full independence from France. The first president, Maurice Yamiago, was the leader of the Voltaic Democratic Union. The 1960 Constitution provided for election by universal suffrage of a president and a National Assembly for 5-year terms. Soon after coming to power, Yamayago banned all political parties other than the UDV. The government lasted until 1966. After much unrest, including mass demonstrations and strikes by students, labor unions, and civil servants, the military intervened. Lamizana's rule and multiple coups. 1983 coup d'état. Burkina Faso. On August 2, 1984, on President Sankara's initiative, the country's name changed from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, or Land of the Honest Men. The presidential decree was confirmed by the National Assembly on August 4. The demonym for people of Burkina Faso, Burkinabe, includes expatriates, or descendants of people of Burkinabe origin. Sankara's government comprised the National Council for the Revolution, with Sankara as its president, and established popular committees for the defense of the revolution. The Pioneers of the Revolution Youth Program was also established. Sankara launched an ambitious socio-economic program for change, one of the largest ever undertaken on the African continent. His foreign policies centered on anti-imperialism, with his government rejecting all foreign aid, pushing for odious debt reduction, nationalizing all land and mineral wealth, and averting the power and influence of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. His domestic policies included a nationwide literacy campaign, land redistribution to peasants, railway and road construction, and the outlawing of female genital mutilation, forced marriages and polygamy. Sankara pushed for agrarian self-sufficiency and promoted public health by vaccinating 2,500,000 children against meningitis, yellow fever, and measles. His national agenda also included planting over 10 million trees to halt the growing desertification of the Sahel. Sankara called on every village to build a medical dispensary and had over 350 communities build schools with their own labor. In the 1980s, when ecological awareness was still very low, Thomas Sankara was one of the few African leaders to consider environmental protection a priority. He engaged in 3 major battles against bush fires, which will be considered as crimes and will be punished as such, against cattle roaming, which infringes on the rights of peoples because unattended animals destroy nature, and against the anarchic cutting of firewood, whose profession will have to be organized and regulated. As part of a development program involving a large part of the population, 10 million trees were planted in Burkina Faso in 15 months during the revolution. To face the advancing desert and recurrent droughts, Thomas Sankara also proposed the planting of wooded strips of about 50 kilometers, crossing the country from east to west. He then thought of extending this vegetation belt to other countries. Cereal production, close to 1.1 billion tons before 1983, was predicted to rise to 1.6 billion tons in 1987. Jean Ziegler, former UN Special Rapporteur for the Right to Food, said that the country had become food self-sufficient. 1987 coup d'état. October 2014 protests. 2015 coup d'état. November 2015 election. November 2020 election. Terrorist attacks. 2022 coups d'état. Government. With French help, Blaise Compaoré seized power in a coup d'état in 1987. He overthrew his longtime friend and ally Thomas Sankara, who was killed in the coup. The Constitution of June 2, 1991 established a semi-presidential government. Its parliament could be dissolved by the President of the Republic, who was to be elected for a term of 7 years. In 2000, the Constitution was amended to reduce the presidential term to 5 years and set term limits to 2, preventing successive re-election. The amendment took effect during the 2005 elections. If passed beforehand, it would have prevented Compaoré from being re-elected. Other presidential candidates challenged the election results. But in October 2005, the Constitutional Council ruled that, because Kambauer was the sitting president in 2000, the amendment would not apply to him until the end of his second term in office. This cleared the way for his candidacy in the 2005 election. On November 13, 2005, Kambauer was re-elected in a landslide, because of a divided political opposition. In the 2010 presidential election, President Kambauer was re-elected. Only 1.6 million Burkinabe voted, out of a total population 10 times that size. The 2011 Burkinabe protests were a series of popular protests that called for the resignation of Kambauer, democratic reforms, higher wages for troops and public servants and economic freedom. As a result, governors were replaced and wages for public servants were raised. The parliament consisted of one chamber known as the National Assembly, which had 111 seats with members elected to serve 5-year terms. There was also a constitutional chamber, composed of 10 members, and an economic and social council whose roles were purely consultative. The 1991 constitution created a bicameral parliament, but the upper house was abolished in 2002. The Kambauer administration had worked to decentralize power by devolving some of its powers to regions and municipal authorities. But the widespread distrust of politicians and lack of political involvement by many residents complicated this process. Critics described this as a hybrid decentralization. Political freedoms are severely restricted in Burkina Faso. Human rights organizations had criticized the Kambauer administration for numerous acts of state-sponsored violence against journalists and other politically active members of society. In mid-September 2015, the Kafando government, along with the rest of the post-October 2014 political order, was temporarily overthrown in a coup attempt by the Regiment of Presidential Security. They installed Gilbert Diendera as chairman of the new National Council for Democracy. On September 23, 2015, the Prime Minister and interim president were restored to power. The national elections were subsequently rescheduled for November 29. Kabore won the election in the first round of voting, receiving 53.5% of the vote against 29.7% for the second-place candidate, Zephyrin Diabra. He was sworn in as president on December 29, 2015. The BBC described the president as a French-educated banker, sees himself as a social democrat, and has pledged to reduce youth unemployment, improve education and health care, and make health provision for children under 6 free of charge. The Prime Minister is head of government and is appointed by the President with the approval of the National Assembly. He is responsible for recommending a cabinet for appointment by the President. Paul Kabathiba was appointed PM in early 2016. According to a World Bank report in late 2018, the political climate was stable. The government was facing social discontent marked by major strikes and protests, organized by unions in several economic sectors, to demand salary increases and social benefits. And increasingly frequent jihadist attacks. The next elections would be held in 2020. Constitution. In 2015, Kabore promised to revise the 1991 Constitution. The revision was completed in 2018. One condition prevents any individual from serving as president for more than 10 years either consecutively or intermittently and provides a method for impeaching a president. A referendum on the Constitution for the Fifth Republic was scheduled for March 24, 2019. Certain rights are also enshrined in the revised wording: access to drinking water, access to decent housing, and a recognition of the right to civil disobedience, for example. The referendum was required because the opposition parties in Parliament refused to sanction the proposed text. Foreign relations. Burkina Faso is a member of the G5 Sahel, Community of Sahel-Saharan States, La Francophonie, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and United Nations. It is currently suspended from ECOWAS and the African Union. Military. The army consists of some 6,000 men in voluntary service, augmented by a part-time National People's Militia composed of civilians between 25 and 35 years of age who are trained in both military and civil duties. According to Jane's Sentinel Country Risk Assessment, Burkina Faso's army is undermanned for its force structure and poorly equipped, but has wheeled light armor vehicles, and may have developed useful combat expertise through interventions in Liberia and elsewhere in Africa. In terms of training and equipment, the regular army is believed to be neglected in relation to the elite regiment of presidential security. Reports have emerged in recent years of disputes over pay and conditions. There is an air force with some 19 operational aircraft, but no navy, as the country is landlocked. Military expenses constitute approximately 1.2% of the nation's GDP. In April 2011, there was an army mutiny, the president named new chiefs of staff, and a curfew was imposed in Ouagadougou. Law enforcement. Burkina Faso employs numerous police and security forces, generally modeled after organizations used by French police. France continues to provide significant support and training to police forces. The Gendarmerie Nationale is organized along military lines, with most police services delivered at the brigade level. The gendarmerie operates under the authority of the Minister of Defense, and its members are employed chiefly in the rural areas and along borders. There is a municipal police force controlled by the Ministry of Territorial Administration, a national police force controlled by the Ministry of Security, and an autonomous regiment of presidential security, a palace guard devoted to the protection of the President of the Republic. Both the gendarmerie and the national police are subdivided into both administrative and judicial police functions. The former are detailed to protect public order and provide security, the latter are charged with criminal investigations. All foreigners and citizens are required to carry photo ID passports, or other forms of identification or risk a fine, and police spot identity checks are commonplace for persons traveling by auto, bush taxi, or bus. Administrative divisions. The country is divided into 13 administrative regions. These regions encompass 45 provinces and 301 departments. Each region is administered by a governor. Geography. Burkina Faso lies mostly between latitudes 9 degrees and 15 degrees north, and longitudes 6 degrees west and 3 degrees east. It is made up of two major types of countryside. The larger part of the country is covered by a peneplain, which forms a gently undulating landscape with, in some areas, a few isolated hills, the last vestiges of a Precambrian massif. The southwest of the country, on the other hand, forms a sandstone massif, where the highest peak, Tenakura, is found at an elevation of 749 meters. The massif is bordered by sheer cliffs up to 150 m high. The average altitude of Burkina Faso is 400 m and the difference between the highest and lowest terrain is no greater than 600 m. Burkina Faso is therefore a relatively flat country. The country owes its former name of Upper Volta to three rivers which cross it, the Black Volta, the White Volta and the Red Volta. The Black Volta is one of the country's only two rivers which flow year-round, the other being the Como, which flows to the southwest. The basin of the Niger River also drains 27% of the country's surface. The Niger's tributaries the Beli, Goroal, Gaudabo, and Dargal are seasonal streams and flow for only 4 to 6 months a year. They still can flood and overflow, however. The country also contains numerous lakes. The principal ones are Tingrela, Bam, and Dem. The country contains large ponds, as well, such as Arsi, Beli, Yambalai, and Marcoy. Water shortages are often a problem, especially in the north of the country. Burkina Faso lies within two terrestrial ecoregions, Sahelian acacia savanna and West Sudanian savanna. Climate. Burkina Faso has a primarily tropical climate with two very distinct seasons. In the rainy season, the country receives between 600 and 900 millimeters of rainfall. In the dry season, the harmattan, a hot dry wind from the Sahara, blows. The rainy season lasts approximately 4 months, May/June to September, and is shorter in the north of the country. 3 climatic zones can be defined: the Sahel, the Sudan Sahel, and the Sudan Guinea. The Sahel in the north typically receives less than 600 millimeters of rainfall per year and has high temperatures, 547 degrees C. A relatively dry tropical savanna, the Sahel extends beyond the borders of Burkina Faso, from the Horn of Africa to the Atlantic Ocean, and borders the Sahara to its north and the fertile region of the Sudan to the south. Situated between 11 degrees 3 minutes and 13 degrees 5 minutes north latitude, the Sudan Sahel region is a transitional zone with regards to rainfall and temperature. Further to the south, the Sudan Guinea zone receives more than 900 millimeters of rain each year and has cooler average temperatures. Geographic and environmental causes can also play a significant role in contributing to Burkina Faso's food insecurity. As the country is situated in the Sahel region, Burkina Faso experiences some of the most radical climatic variation in the world, ranging from severe flooding to extreme drought. The unpredictable climatic shock that Burkina Faso citizens often face results in strong difficulties in being able to rely on and accumulate wealth through agricultural means. Burkina Faso's climate also renders its crops vulnerable to insect attacks, including attacks from locusts and crickets, which destroy crops and further inhibit food production. Not only is most of the population of Burkina Faso dependent on agriculture as a source of income, but they also rely on the agricultural sector for food that will directly feed the household. Due to the vulnerability of agriculture, more and more families are having to look for other sources of non-farm income, and often have to travel outside of their regional zone to find work. Natural resources. Burkina Faso's natural resources include gold, manganese, limestone, marble, phosphates, pumice, and salt. Wildlife. Burkina Faso has a larger number of elephants than many countries in West Africa. Lions, leopards, and buffalo can also be found here, including the dwarf or red buffalo, a smaller reddish-brown animal which looks like a fierce kind of short-legged cow. Other large predators live in Burkina Faso, such as the cheetah, the caracal or African lynx, the spotted hyena and the African wild dog, one of the continent's most endangered species. Burkina Faso's fauna and flora are protected in 4 national parks. The W National Park in the east, which passes Burkina Faso, Benin, and Niger. The Arli Wildlife Reserve. The Larabacomo Classified Forest and Partial Reserve of Wildlife in the west. The Mare Auxiliary Hippopotames in the west and several reserves. See List of national parks in Africa and nature reserves of Burkina Faso. Economy. The value of Burkina Faso's exports fell from $2.77 billion in 2011 to $754 million in 2012. Agriculture represents 32% of its gross domestic product and occupies 80% of the working population. It consists mostly of rearing livestock. Especially in the south and southwest, the people grow crops of sorghum, pearl millet, maize, peanuts, rice, and cotton, with surpluses to be sold. A large part of the economic activity of the country is funded by international aid, despite having gold ores in abundance. The top 5 export commodities in 2017 were, in order of importance, gems and precious metals, $1.9 billion, cotton, $198.7 million, ores, slag, ash, $137.6 million, fruits, nuts, $76.6 million and oil seeds, $59.5 million. A December 2018 report from the World Bank indicates that in 2017, economic growth increased to 6.4% in 2017 primarily due to gold production and increased investment in infrastructure. The increase in consumption linked to growth of the wage bill also supported economic growth. Inflation remained low, 0.4% that year, but the public deficit grew to 7.7% of GDP. The government was continuing to get financial aid and loans to finance the debt. To finance the public deficit, the government combined concessional aid and borrowing on the regional market. The World Bank said that the economic outlook remained favorable in the short and medium term, although that could be negatively impacted. Risks included high oil prices, lower prices of gold and cotton, as well as terrorist threat and labor strikes. Burkina Faso is part of the West African Monetary and Economic Union and has adopted the CFA franc. This is issued by the Central Bank of the West African States, situated in Dakar, Senegal. The BCAO manages the monetary and reserve policy of the member states, and provides regulation and oversight of financial sector and banking activity. A legal framework regarding licensing, bank activities, organizational and capital requirements, inspections, and sanctions is in place, having been reformed significantly in 1999. Microfinance institutions are governed by a separate law, which regulates microfinance activities in all WAMU countries. The insurance sector is regulated through the Inter-African Conference on Insurance Markets. In 2018, tourism was almost non-existent in large parts of the country. The U.S. government warned their citizens not to travel into large parts of Burkina Faso, the northern Sahel border region shared with Mali and Niger, due to crime and terrorism. The provinces of Kamo-Anjeri, Tapo, Kompienga, and Gourma in East region due to crime and terrorism. The 2018 CIA World Factbook provides this updated summary. Burkina Faso is a poor, landlocked country that depends on adequate rainfall. Irregular patterns of rainfall, poor soil, and the lack of adequate communications and other infrastructure contribute to the economy's vulnerability to external shocks. About 80% of the population is engaged in subsistence farming, and cotton is the main cash crop. The country has few natural resources and a weak industrial base. Cotton and gold are Burkina Faso's key exports. The country has seen an upswing in gold exploration, production, and exports. While the end of the political crisis has allowed Burkina Faso's economy to resume positive growth, the country's fragile security situation could put these gains at risk. Political insecurity in neighboring Mali, unreliable energy supplies, and poor transportation links pose long-term challenges. The report also highlights the 2018-2020 International Monetary Fund program, including the government's plan to reduce the budget deficit and preserve critical spending on social services and priority public investments. A 2018 report by the African Development Bank Group discussed a macroeconomic evolution, higher investment and continued spending on social services and security that will add to the budget deficit. This group's prediction for 2018 indicated that the budget deficit would be reduced to 4.8% of GDP in 2018 and to 2.9% in 2019. Public debt associated with the National Economic and Social Development Plan was estimated at 36.9% of GDP in 2017. Burkina Faso is a member of the Organization for the Harmonization of Business Law in Africa. The country also belongs to the United Nations, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and World Trade Organization. Mining. There is mining of copper, iron, manganese, gold, cassiterite, and phosphates. These operations provide employment and generate international aid. Gold production increased 32% in 2011 at 6 gold mine sites, making Burkina Faso the fourth largest gold producer in Africa, after South Africa, Mali, and Ghana. A 2018 report indicated that the country expected record 55 tons of gold in that year, a two-thirds increase over 2013. According to Imara Idani, there is a more important issue. We have to diversify production. We mostly only produce gold, but we have huge potential in manganese, zinc, lead, copper, nickel and limestone. Food insecurity. According to the Global Hunger Index, a multidimensional tool used to measure and track a country's hunger levels, Burkina Faso ranked 65 out of 78 countries in 2013. It is estimated that there are currently over 1.5 million children who are at risk of food insecurity in Burkina Faso, with around 350,000 children who are in need of emergency medical assistance. However, only about a third of these children will actually receive adequate medical attention. Only 11.4% of children under the age of 2 receive the daily recommended number of meals. Stunted growth as a result of food insecurity is a severe problem in Burkina Faso, affecting at least a third of the population from 2008 to 2012. Additionally, stunted children, on average, tend to complete less school than children with normal growth development, further contributing to the low levels of education of the Burkina Faso population. The European Commission expects that approximately 500,000 children under age 5 in Burkina Faso will suffer from acute malnutrition in 2015, including around 149,000 who will suffer from its most life-threatening form. Rates of micronutrient deficiencies are also high. According to the Demographic and Health Survey, 49% of women and 88% of children under the age of 5 suffer from anemia. 40% of infant deaths can be attributed to malnutrition, and in turn, these infant mortality rates have decreased Burkina Faso's total workforce by 13.6%, demonstrating how food security affects more aspects of life beyond health. These high rates of food insecurity and the accompanying effects are even more prevalent in rural populations compared to urban ones, as access to health services in rural areas is much more limited and awareness and education of children's nutritional needs is lower. An October 2018 report by USAID stated that droughts and floods remained problematic, and that violence and insecurity are disrupting markets, trade, and livelihoods activities in some of Burkina Faso's northern and eastern areas. The report estimated that over 954,300 people needed food security support, and that, according to UNICEF, an estimated 187,200 children under 5 years of age will experience severe acute malnutrition. Agencies providing assistance at the time included USAID's Office of Food for Peace working with the UN World Food Programme, the NGO Oxfam Intermin and ACDI/VOCA. Approaches to improving food security. World Food Programme. World Bank. Infrastructure and services. Water. While services remain underdeveloped, the National Office for Water and Sanitation, a state-owned utility company run along commercial lines, is emerging as one of the best-performing utility companies in Africa. High levels of autonomy and a skilled and dedicated management have driven ONI's ability to improve production of and access to clean water. Since 2000, nearly 2 million more people have access to water in the 4 principal urban centers in the country. The company has kept the quality of infrastructure high, improved financial reporting, and increased its annual revenue by an average of 12%. Challenges remain, including difficulties among some customers in paying for services, with the need to rely on international aid to expand its infrastructure. The state-owned, commercially run venture has helped the nation reach its Millennium Development Goal targets in water-related areas, and has grown as a viable company. However, access to drinking water has improved over the last 28 years. According to UNICEF, access to drinking water has increased from 39 to 76% in rural areas between 1990 and 2015. In this same time span, access to drinking water increased from 75 to 97% in urban areas. Electricity. A 33-megawatt solar power plant in Zagtuli, near Ouagadougou, came online in late November 2017. At the time of its construction, it was the largest solar power facility in West Africa. Other. The growth rate in Burkina Faso is high, although it continues to be plagued by corruption and incursions from terrorist groups from Mali and Niger. Transport. Transport in Burkina Faso is limited by relatively underdeveloped infrastructure. As of June 2014, the main international airport, Ouagadougou Airport, had regularly scheduled flights to many destinations in West Africa as well as Paris, Brussels, and Istanbul. The other international airport, Bobo Dioulasso Airport, has flights to Ouagadougou and Abidjan. Rail transport in Burkina Faso consists of a single line which runs from Kaya to Abidjan in Ivory Coast via Ouagadougou, Ouagadougou, Bobo Dioulasso, and Banfora. Cityrail operates a passenger train 3 times a week along the route. There are 15,000 kilometers of roads in Burkina Faso, of which 2,500 kilometers are paved. Science and technology. In 2009, Burkina Faso spent 0.20% of GDP on research and development, one of the lowest ratios in West Africa. There were 48 researchers per million inhabitants in 2010, which is more than twice the average for sub-Saharan Africa and higher than the ratio for Ghana and Nigeria. It is, however, much lower than the ratio for Senegal. In Burkina Faso in 2010, 46% of researchers were working in the health sector, 16% in engineering, 13% in natural sciences, 9% in agricultural sciences, 7% in the humanities and 4% in social sciences. Burkina Faso was ranked 115th in the Global Innovation Index in 2021, up from 118th in 2020. In January 2011, the government created the Ministry of Scientific Research and Innovation. Up until then, Management of Science, Technology, and Innovation had fallen under the Department of Secondary and Higher Education and Scientific Research. Within this ministry, the Directorate General for Research and Sector Statistics is responsible for planning. A separate body, the Directorate General of Scientific Research, Technology, and Innovation, coordinates research. This is a departure from the pattern in many other West African countries where a single body fulfills both functions. The move signals the government's intention to make science and technology a development priority. In 2012, Burkina Faso adopted a national policy for scientific and technical research, the strategic objectives of which are to develop R&D and the application and commercialization of research results. The policy also makes provisions for strengthening the ministry's strategic and operational capacities. One of the key priorities is to improve food security and self-sufficiency by boosting capacity in agricultural and environmental sciences. The creation of a Center of Excellence in 2014 at the International Institute of Water and Environmental Engineering in Ouagadougou within the World Bank project provides essential funding for capacity building in these priority areas. A dual priority is to promote innovative, effective, and accessible health systems. The government wishes to develop, in parallel, applied sciences and technology and social and human sciences. To complement the national research policy, the government has prepared a national strategy to popularize technologies, inventions, and innovations and a national innovation strategy. Other policies also incorporate science and technology, such as that on secondary and higher education and scientific research, the National Policy on Food and Nutrition Security and the National Program for the Rural Sector. In 2013, Burkina Faso passed the Science, Technology, and Innovation Act establishing 3 mechanisms for financing research and innovation, a clear indication of high-level commitment. These mechanisms are the National Fund for Education and Research, the National Fund for Research and Innovation for Development, and the Forum of Scientific Research and Technological Innovation. Demographics. Burkina Faso is an ethnically integrated, secular state where most people are concentrated in the south and center, where their density sometimes exceeds 48 inhabitants per square kilometer. Hundreds of thousands of Burkinabe migrate regularly to Ivory Coast and Ghana, mainly for seasonal agricultural work. These flows of workers are affected by external events, the September 2002 coup attempt in Ivory Coast and the ensuing fighting meant that hundreds of thousands of Burkinabe returned to Burkina Faso. The regional economy suffered when they were unable to work. In 2015, most of the population belonged to one of 2 West African ethnic cultural groups, the Voltaic and the Mande. Voltaic Mossi make up about 50% of the population and are descended from warriors who moved to the area from Ghana around 1100, establishing an empire that lasted over 800 years. The total fertility rate of Burkina Faso is 5.93 children born per woman, the 6th highest in the world. In 2009, the U.S. Department of State's Trafficking in Persons report reported that slavery in Burkina Faso continued to exist and that Burkinabe children were often the victims. Slavery in the Sahel states in general is an entrenched institution with a long history that dates back to the trans-Saharan slave trade. In 2018, an estimated 82,000 people in the country were living under modern slavery according to the Global Slavery Index. Ethnic groups. Burkina Faso's 17.3 million people belong to 2 major West African ethnic cultural groups, the Voltaic and the Mande. The Voltaic Mossi make up about 1/2 of the population. The Mossi claim descent from warriors who migrated to present-day Burkina Faso from northern Ghana around 1100 AD. They established an empire that lasted more than 800 years. Predominantly farmers, the Mossi kingdom is led by the Mo'o Naba, whose court is in Ouagadougou. Languages. Burkina Faso is a multilingual country. The official language is French, which was introduced during the colonial period. French is the principal language of administrative, political, and judicial institutions, public services, and the press. It is the only language for laws, administration, and courts. Altogether, an estimated 69 languages are spoken in the country, of which about 60 languages are indigenous. The Moor language is the most spoken language in Burkina Faso, spoken by about half the population, mainly in the central region around the capital, Ouagadougou. According to the 2006 census, the languages spoken natively in Burkina Faso were Moor by 50.5% of the population, Fula by 9.3%, Gourmand by 6.1%, Bambara by 4.9%, Bassa by 3.2%, Bwamua by 2.1%, Dagara by 2%, San by 1.9%, Lobarai with 1.8%, Lyle with 1.7%, Bobo and Sanufo with 1.4% each, Nuni by 1.2%, Dafing by 1.1%, Tamashek by 1%, Kassam by 0.7%, Gwin by 0.4%, Dogon, Songhai, and Goraunsi by 0.3% each, Ko, Kozas, Semblat, and Siama by 0.1% each, other national languages by 5%, other African languages by 0.2%, French by 1.3%, and other non-indigenous languages by 0.1%. In the West, Mande languages are widely spoken, the most predominant being Diola, others including Bobo, Samo, and Marca. Fula is widespread, particularly in the north. Gourmand is spoken in the east, while Bassa is spoken in the south. Health. In 2016, the average life expectancy was estimated at 60 for males and 61 for females. In 2018, the under 5 mortality rate and the infant mortality rate was 76 per 1,000 live births. In 2014, the median age of its inhabitants was 17 and the estimated population growth rate was 3.05%. In 2011, health expenditures was 6.5% of GDP. The maternal mortality ratio was estimated at 300 deaths per 100,000 live births and the physician density at 0.05 per 1,000 population in 2010. In 2012, it was estimated that the adult HIV prevalence rate was 1.0%. According to the 2011 UNAIDS report, HIV prevalence is declining among pregnant women who attend antenatal clinics. According to a 2005 World Health Organization report, an estimated 72.5% of Burkina Faso's girls and women have had female genital mutilation, administered according to traditional rituals. Central government spending on health was 3% in 2001. As of 2009, studies estimated there were as few as 10 physicians per 100,000 people. In addition, there were 41 nurses and 13 midwives per 100,000 people. Demographic and Health Surveys has completed 3 surveys in Burkina Faso since 1993, and had another in 2009. A dengue fever outbreak in 2016 killed 20 patients. Cases of the disease were reported from all 12 districts of Ouagadougou. Religion. Statistics on religion in Burkina Faso can be misleading because Islam and Christianity are often practiced in tandem with indigenous religious beliefs. The government of Burkina Faso's 2019 census reported that 63.8% of the population practice Islam, and that the majority of this group belong to the Sunni branch, while a small minority adheres to Shia Islam. A significant number of Sunni Muslims identify with the Tijaniya Sufi order. The 2019 census also found that 26.3% of the population are Christians, 9.0% follow traditional indigenous beliefs such as the Dogon religion, 0.2% have other religions, and 0.7% have none. Animists are the largest religious group in the country's southwest region, forming 48.1% of its total population. Education. Education in Burkina Faso is divided into primary, secondary, and higher education. High school costs approximately CFA 25,000 per year, which is far above the means of most Burkinabe families. Boys receive preference in schooling. As such, girls' education and literacy rates are far lower than their male counterparts. An increase in girls' schooling has been observed because of the government's policy of making school cheaper for girls and granting them more scholarships. To proceed from primary to middle school, middle to high school or high school to college, national exams must be passed. Institutions of higher education include the University of Ouagadougou, the Polytechnic University of Bobo-Dioulasso, and the University of Ouagadougou, which is also a teacher training institution. There are some small private colleges in the capital city of Ouagadougou, but these are affordable to only a small portion of the population. There is also the International School of Ouagadougou, an American-based private school located in Ouagadougou. The 2008 UN Development Programme report ranked Burkina Faso as the country with the lowest level of literacy in the world, despite a concerted effort to double its literacy rate from 12.8% in 1990 to 25.3% in 2008. Culture. Literature in Burkina Faso is based on the oral tradition, which remains important. In 1934, during French occupation, Dimdo Lobsamaura Ogo published his Maximes, Pensées et Devinettes Mossi, a record of the oral history of the Mossi people. The oral tradition continued to have an influence on Burkinabe writers in the post-independence Burkina Faso of the 1960s, such as Natsi Boni and Roger Nikima. The 1960s saw a growth in the number of playwrights being published. Since the 1970s, literature has developed in Burkina Faso with many more writers being published. The theatre of Burkina Faso combines traditional Burkinabe performance with the colonial influences and post-colonial efforts to educate rural people to produce a distinctive national theatre. Traditional ritual ceremonies of the many ethnic groups in Burkina Faso have long involved dancing with masks. Western-style theatre became common during colonial times, heavily influenced by French theatre. With independence came a new style of theatre inspired by forum theatre aimed at educating and entertaining Burkina Faso's rural people. Slam poetry is increasing in popularity in the country, in part due to the efforts of slam poet Malika Ouattara. She uses her skills to raise awareness around issues such as blood donation, albinism, and the impact of COVID-19. Arts and crafts. In addition to several rich traditional artistic heritages among the peoples, there is a large artist community in Burkina Faso, especially in Ouagadougou. Much of the crafts produced are for the country's growing tourist industry. Burkina Faso also hosts the International Art and Craft Fair, Ouagadougou. It is better known by its French name as SIAO, Le Salon International de l'Artisanat de Ouagadougou, and is one of the most important African handicraft fairs. Cuisine. Typical of West African cuisine, Burkina Faso's cuisine is based on staple foods of sorghum, millet, rice, maize, peanuts, potatoes, beans, yams, and okra. The most common sources of animal protein are chicken eggs and freshwater fish. A typical Burkinabe beverage is banji or palm wine, which is fermented palm sap, and zoom com, or grain water, purportedly the national drink of Burkina Faso. Zoom com is milky-looking and whitish, having a water and cereal base, best drunk with ice cubes. In the more rural regions, in the outskirts of Burkina, you would find dolo, which is drink made from fermented millet. Cinema. The cinema of Burkina Faso is an important part of West African and African film industry. Burkina's contribution to African cinema started with the establishment of the film festival FESPACO, which was launched as a film week in 1969. Many of the nation's filmmakers are known internationally and have won international prizes. For many years the headquarters of the Federation of Pan-African Filmmakers was in Ouagadougou, rescued in 1983 from a period of moribund inactivity by the enthusiastic support and funding of President Sankara. Among the best-known directors from Burkina Faso are Gaston Kabor, Idrissa Arogo, and Danny Kouiate. Burkina produces popular television series such as Les Baba Diouf. Internationally known filmmakers such as Arogo, Kabor, Yamiago, and Kouiate make popular television series. Sports. Sport in Burkina Faso is widespread and includes soccer, basketball, cycling, rugby union, handball, tennis, boxing and martial arts. Soccer is the most popular sport in Burkina Faso, played both professionally and informally in towns and villages across the country. The national team is nicknamed Les Edelons in reference to the legendary horse of Princess Yenanga. In 1998, Burkina Faso hosted the Africa Cup of Nations, for which the Omnisport Stadium in Bobo-Dioulasso was built. Burkina Faso qualified for the 2013 African Cup of Nations in South Africa and reached the final, but then lost to Nigeria 0-1. The country is currently ranked 53rd in the FIFA World Rankings, and has shown improvement in recent years, although they have never qualified for a FIFA World Cup. Basketball is another sport which enjoys much popularity for both men and women. The country's men's national team had its most successful year in 2013 when it qualified for the Afrobasket, the continent's prime basketball event. At the 2020 Summer Olympics, the athlete Hugues Fabrice Zango won Burkina Faso's first Olympic medal, winning bronze in the men's triple jump. Cricket is also picking up in Burkina Faso, with Cricket Burkina Faso running a 10-club league. Music. Media. The nation's principal media outlet is its state-sponsored combined television and radio service, Radiodiffusion Television Burkina. RTB broadcasts on 2 medium wave and several FM frequencies. Besides RTB, there are privately owned sports, cultural, music, and religious FM radio stations. RTB maintains a worldwide shortwave news broadcast in the French language from the capital at Ouagadougou using a 100 kW transmitter on 4.815 and 5.030 MHz. Attempts to develop an independent press and media in Burkina Faso have been intermittent. In 1998, investigative journalist Norbert Zongo, his brother Ernest, his driver, and another man were assassinated by unknown assailants, and the bodies burned. The crime was never solved. However, an independent commission of inquiry later concluded that Norbert Zongo was killed for political reasons because of his investigative work into the death of David Araogo, a chauffeur who worked for François Compaoré, President Blaise Compaoré's brother. In January 1999, François Compaoré was charged with the murder of David Araogo, who had died as a result of torture in January 1998. The charges were later dropped by a military tribunal after an appeal. In August 2000, 5 members of the president's personal security guard detail were charged with the murder of Araogo. RSP members Marcel Cafando, Edmond Koama, and Asiani Yero, investigated as suspects in the Norbert Zongo assassination, were convicted in the Araogo case and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Since the death of Norbert Zongo, several protests regarding the Zongo investigation and treatment of journalists have been prevented or dispersed by government police and security forces. In April 2007, popular radio reggae host Karim Sama, whose programs feature reggae songs interspersed with critical commentary on alleged government injustice and corruption, received several death threats. Sama's personal car was later burned outside the private radio station Waga FM by unknown vandals. In response, the Committee to Protect Journalists wrote to President Compaoré to request his government investigate the sending of emailed death threats to journalists and radio commentators in Burkina Faso who were critical of the government. In December 2008, police in Ouagadougou questioned leaders of a protest march that called for a renewed investigation into the unsolved Zongo assassination. Among the marchers was Jean-Claude Mita, the president of the Association of Journalists of Burkina Faso. Cultural festivals and events. Every 2 years, Ouagadougou hosts the Pan-African Film and Television Festival of Ouagadougou, the largest African cinema festival on the continent. Held every 2 years since 1988, the International Art and Craft Fair, Ouagadougou, is one of Africa's most important trade shows for art and handicrafts. Also every 2 years, the Symposium de Sculpture sur Granit de Longo takes place on a site located about 35 kilometers from Ouagadougou, in the province of Haut-Bretagne. The National Culture Week of Burkina Faso, better known by its French name La Semaine Nationale de la Culture, is one of the most important cultural activities of Burkina Faso. It is a biennial event which takes place every 2 years in Bobo-Dioulasso, the second largest city in the country. The Festival International des Masques et des Arts, celebrating traditional masks, is held every 2 years in Dadaougou. See also: Index of Burkina Faso related articles. Outline of Burkina Faso. References.